All right, looks like we are live. I want to welcome everybody to Standing for Truth. I am your host, SFT. If you enjoy this ministry and are not yet subscribed, then please make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you are already subscribed, then please share around this important content. Now, before I bring in Professor David McQueen and our award-winning co-host, George Bond, I'm going to go over a couple reminders for everybody. We've got a pack-filled summer of events. And this Wednesday, we will have Dr. Frank Turek on the show for a talk on I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. So there will be a live audience Q&A. Make sure you are bringing your questions. Thursday, we've got the big debate between Dr. Kenny Rhodes from Reasons to Believe versus Dr. Kent Hovind, and they will be debating the age of the earth. So make sure you are here for that. Also, please check the past shows. We had a busy week last week, and we also put out a video last night, Raw, Matt, and myself debunking the critics, specifically Joel Duff. So that being said, let us bring in Professor David McQueen and George Bond. Gentlemen, brothers, thanks so much for being here.
It's so good to see you guys again. It's been 3 weeks for me. I've been missing you, George.
Oh, thank you, David. Likewise. It's an interesting subject for me. I didn't know much about South Africa. I knew about the diamonds and the gold, but that's about all. And it was good to do a bit of research on it.
Yeah, and I appreciate your help. The class, I want you to know the format is I'm going to give a 5-minute introduction to what we're going to be doing. George will do the same. And then after that, I'll come back for a 20-minute introduction to what might be called biblical geology, creation geology, which precedes flood geology. We'll talk about that. And then George has 20 minutes that he has prepared. And then we'll take Q&A up until the 1-hour break. And then after the 1-hour break, we'll come back and talk in some detail about the whole issue of how old are the diamonds, according to the evolutionary community, in the Kimberlites of South Africa. But here is how I want to begin. I spilled water on it a few minutes ago, so I can't put it on over my keyboard. We want to talk about models, the old Earth model versus the young Earth model. And I want to use a style that I've used in my teaching over the last 50 years, and that is the style of a jigsaw puzzle. George, I guess you know the old joke about an Australian was putting this puzzle together, and it says 8+ years there. And
Yeah.
so the Australian worked on it for a whole year, and his wife said, "Well, why are you taking so long?" He said, "Well, it takes 8 years." Yeah. So what's my point? This is a 500-piece jigsaw puzzle. My wife and some of my children have the patience for this. And this is the beautiful picture that it depicts. And we'll be talking about mountains. So I picked out a mountain scene. But I want to pose this question. What's the most important part of this jigsaw puzzle? Well, it's obviously the picture on the front, because once you get all the flat pieces around the edges, how do you know how to put the rest of it on? Well, as you take the pieces out, you leave the picture right there, and that tells you how to put it together. How does that tie into our discussion of young Earth creationism versus traditional evolutionary geology? Well, the framework of Genesis gives us a basis for understanding how to put the puzzle together. What do I mean by that? If you look at two models, and we're going into a part of the world that most people don't even know where Botswana is and Zimbabwe and their relationship to South Africa. We're going into a world of geology that many creation sciences have not dealt with. So in order to understand it, we need a framework. Now, the old German theologians had two words that they used all through the 1800s and early 1900s. And those were the German words Weltbild and Weltanschauung. Well, Weltbild means a picture of the world. Weltanschauung is the philosophical view of how the world came to be. So the Weltbild will be the data that George and I will be sharing about the cratons of Southern Africa and details about that. But the Weltanschauung is the picture on the front of the box. The evolutionary community wants us to believe that these mountains that you see here and the topography, the geomorphology, all flowed by time plus chance and impersonal forces into a picture of geology that is old and slow, not young and fast, the way the catastrophic view takes it. And so we want to challenge our critics to what's called a multiple working hypothesis. Let's view the geology of creation, the geology of the Great Flood as one model, and the traditional billions of years of the evolutionary viewpoint, the other model. So what fits better, billions or thousands? How do you react to that, George?
Well, there's lots of evidence to suggest or indicate that it's a young Earth, but others have got pre-existing presuppositions, and it conflicts with their narrative.
How true. I'm finished, George, with my 5 minutes. Go ahead with yours.
Oh, okay. Well, Standing, I'd like you to share my screen, please.
Definitely, brother. And I want to let the audience know, please tag me with your questions. If you're a critic, tag us with your objections in the form of a question, because we are going to be having an audience Q&A. As we always do, we like to make this interactive. So tag me at Standing for Truth.
In 40 minutes, we'll be ready for your questions. So send them over to SFT.
Is that coming through?
It is. It is.
Yeah.
It looks beautiful, George.
Okay. Well, sorry to... I guess this is basic high school geography. Africa, as you can see there, and the island to the east is Madagascar. Is situated just south of Europe and west of Australia and east of South America. The topic today is about South Africa, and South Africa is that area that's shaded light brown or orange at the bottom. Now, South Africa is the country at the southernmost corner of the continent. It's flanked by the Indian Ocean and to the east, and the Atlantic Ocean to the west. Now, South Africa holds, I think most of you probably know that it holds the largest gold and platinum deposits. It has the world's best quality diamond, and we'll be talking about diamonds in more detail later on. And it also has significant deposits of iron and coal. The central area is composed of crystalline rocks, mainly gneiss and granite, but also mafic, ultramafic volcanic sequences. I'm sure David will talk about the geology of South Africa in more detail. But that's a sort of close-up map of South Africa. And I'm sure we'll touch on the Kimberley or the Kimberlites. The Kimberlites are named after Kimberley. I think it's Lord Kimberley. So I'm not sure whether I should take up too much time, but just a few terms. We'll introduce you to some geology of South Africa, but just some terms we need to sort of get our head around of. You might hear Professor McQueen say the word craton or craton.
Yes.
This is just a large stable block of the Earth's crust forming the nucleus of a continent. Usually, I believe it'd be some form of granite. And also with South Africa, you may hear the word karst, Karst. Now, this is just a landscape underlain by limestone, which has been eroded by dissolution, producing ridges, towers, fissures, sinkholes, and other characteristic landforms like caves, etc. Yeah, look, I won't take any more of that. I think that was an interesting sort of introduction just to get people around the geography and where South Africa is and why we're going to talk about its geology. You'll see later on some of the images that I've captured of folding ranges, etc., why we believe it fits within the biblical global flood narrative. Yeah. And without going too much into it, I'll pass it on to Professor McQueen to get the ball rolling on the geology part of it.
Okay, good. Thank you, George. That's an excellent introduction. And you'll see that my diagrams are an attempt to simplify what you did such a wonderful job on there. And help me keep track of the time. 20 minutes from now should be about, let's see, it's
about the 34-minute mark.
Okay, good. Thank you. help me keep track of my 20 minutes. Okay, we're going to talk about the flood geology of South Africa and then Southern Africa, because I want to make a comment about my field work in the country of Zimbabwe in 2019. In preparing for this, I want to put off until next month a detailed discussion of the granites and biotites that I found in Zimbabwe. So we'll focus a lot on South Africa. And I have taught geography in my day. And so I like to depict continents as geometrical figures, squares, rectangles, triangles. And so here is a triangular view of Africa with the equator at Victoria Falls. And we're going to emphasize this area circled in red here. Africa is a fascinating place, and we're going to see next hour exactly where he fits in biblically. But we want to learn some of the vocabulary that I have summarized here. The E there is the equator in Southern Africa. And we need to learn some of the countries that are north of South Africa. For those of you that received your education in the 20th century, you'll be interested in some details. It turns out that Namibia, in the old days, 1884, was called German Southwest Africa. And it changed hands and was argued through the League of Nations and the UN, but finally became its own country. And so Namibia is the N there. The B stands for Botswana. Z is Zimbabwe. You'll notice I've drawn Victoria Falls. The body of water north of Victoria Falls is right where the equator is in Africa. And then the country of Mozambique is to the east of Zimbabwe. Now, south of all four of these countries is South Africa itself. You may recall that Zimbabwe, when I was going through my schooling early on in the 60s, that was Rhodesia. And the capital was Salisbury. When the revolution came, they changed the country name to Zimbabwe, and the capital is now called Harare. And so there have been a lot of changes in Africa, but no change in the geology. The reason the Germans were in Namibia back in the old days, Southwest Africa, and the reason that the Brits and the Irish flooded into Rhodesia was the fantastic mineral wealth. When Rhodesia was up and running, Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, was the breadbasket of Africa. Huge crops were grown there. And it is so sad with that background that there's some real starvation going on, especially with the COVID lockdown in Zimbabwe. Now, let's turn to a summary of the geology. You heard George mention the word craton. Now, this is the Kapval. Now, this is Afrikaans. It's a mixture of Dutch and German and other European languages, but Afrikaans, I think it's pronounced Kapval craton. And that's one of the cratons that George showed you on the geologic map. That's one we're going to emphasize. Now, why emphasize that particular craton? Well, once again, we have to make sure that we're using the words correctly. Craton is a word referring to Precambrian rocks that are rocks without fossils. We will see how that fits into the biblical picture. But let me use a couple of toys that I, once again, borrowed from my grandchildren. to see how we're going to use the word dike to talk about what happens in a craton. So imagine each one of these, the green one and the orange one, to be what's called a dike. Now, in European vocabulary, it's spelled D-Y-K-E. In the U.S., for some reason, most professors use the word D-I-K-E. And the way that the word is used is if you have a bedrock, a craton, that's got some layering in it or foliation, and you've got something that cuts across it, that's called a dike. If you have an igneous rock that flows up in it and parallels that foliation, that is called a sill, S-I-L-L. So we're going to be talking about Kimberlite dikes, and these are so big that I can put them down on Mrs. McQueen's kitchen floor as an illustration of the floor being the boundary between the crust and the mantle. And so at a certain point, probably during creation week, and then perhaps also later on during the flood, a unique kind of igneous rock called a kimberlite blasted up from the mantle to into the crust. Now, for those of you that are young watching this, you might get a kick out of this. So let's make this blast up. So there it goes. Oh, it blasted all the way up. Whoops, I'm about to knock my computer over. And so it very quickly moved up into the crust. Now, why is that important in a young Earth creation model? You don't need millions of years for these kimberlite dikes to erupt and move. They move up within a matter of days, going up through fractures and so forth in the rock. And so now, if you're writing these things down, you know the word craton, the word dike, and the word sill. So let's see what else we have on our introduction here. So the Capval craton is where we're going to be talking about these kimberlites. Now we get into some geology that even professional geologists have to go back and write some words down. When I was going through college in the early 70s, what is now called the Neo-Proterozoic was simply called the Precambrian. If it had any word at all, it had words associated with the geology of Canada, words like Archean and other words like that that are used for the craton in Canada. But in the geology of South Africa, they talk now about the Neo-Proterozoic era. Now, notice that runs from 1 billion years in the evolutionary model up to 541 million years. Now, we've talked about this enough that should ring a bell. 541 million years ago is the beginning of the Cambrian. And so that is the beginning of the Salk sequence that Tim Clary has done such a wonderful job to document. And we will this fall come back to this whole topic of sequence stratigraphy. But the only thing you need to know today is that the Cambrian is right on top of this on top of this craton. Now, the next thing you need to realize is that this part of South Africa that we've talked about was part of a supercontinent called the Rhodina. I must admit, George, I had to laugh almost when I saw that, because I think that's close to the Russian word for mother. I don't quite know my Russian very well, but I think
neither do I.
Something close to that. Okay, now this ties into what we've talked about in the past. Biblically, on the third day of creation, we have this C-shaped continent, one world continent. E is where I suspect Eden was. And R is this Rhodina. This is the South African supercontinent that includes part. If you see over my shoulder on this side, if I can get my hand going right, there's the continent of Antarctica. And so Antarctica was once part of this Rodina. Now let's keep on going here. Precambrian rocks in the flood geology model, or creation week model, if you will, are rocks without fossils created on day 3. I will save until after the break a discussion of what exactly happened biblically on day 3. But for now, we will end our summary there. I hope, George, you make note of those new geology words, because at Christmas, you're going to receive your diploma from me as a real geologist.
Thanks. Standing, can I share the screen, because I want to add to something that Professor McQueen had shown, some diagrams that will illustrate exactly what he was talking about.
Definitely, yeah. If you want to share screen. And to everybody in the chat, make sure you are tagging me at Standing for Truth with your questions or objections. So, Brother George, you wanted me to share your screen?
Yep.
You're good to go.
Can you see that?
Yes.
That's what Professor McQueen was talking about. That's the seal there, a dike going up. Your main lava flow. So they're just some descriptions there that you can see illustrated.
Excellent diagram. Excellent.
Yeah. Now these are some of the known Kimberlites worldwide. You can see it's pretty catastrophic. They pretty much exist all over the world in pretty much every continent. But there's an example of a Kimberlite, and another one that's an open mine. Now this is the Kimberlites that Professor McQueen was talking about. There's 3 stages to them. As you can see, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And that's a close-up of stage 2. Professor McQueen covered this in another stream that we had months ago, where it's more like a funnel where the magma is ejected through the earth through a funnel type system. And
Yes.
as it comes out, it goes, what did you say, Professor McQueen? Boom!
Oh yes, it's a very rapid, catastrophic movement of lava up, bringing diamonds, as we will talk about next hour, from that crust mantle boundary.
Yeah, you can see some more diagrams there of the Kimberlite. It just illustrating exactly what actually happens. It is that, by the way, is a diamond if you haven't seen it, but in particular, I think it's the South Africa diamond. I think it's about 83, 84 carats. So a pretty big diamond. I'll show. There's a diamond inside the rock there. Another view of it, and another one. Some more diamonds. Okay, who can tell me what that is?
That's is that an actual rock that is called a kimberlite?
That's correct. Kimberlite, yeah, 10 out of 10. Okay, that's the Star of Africa. Sorry, I forgot the name. That's the Star of Africa. That shows you the size of the diamond. It's a pretty big diamond and very impressive, actually. But look, yeah, without sort of going into too much, but Professor McQueen talked about how the continent was shaped through the, I guess, we found certain fossils via the various continents, and using those fossils, we can actually tie the general sort of sequence of the continents.
Yes,
Now, now that's not a complete one, of course, but it shows you how using those fossils they can actually show that these continents were once connected.
And you can see there, leave that for a second.
Yep.
You can see there what the South African geologist called the Rodina. Antarctica is right up there against South Africa.
Yep.
And when we go back to my screen, we'll be able to see that peninsula that you see there.
Yeah, we'll talk. Do you want to talk about the geology of some of these, David? Because I've got some very good photos of.
Oh, yes, you do. Yes, you do. And
so if I can go to the very, whoops, I think I've gone up too far. Now this is the secular illustration of how these folded rocks or the Cape Fold Mountains happened.
Yes.
They say originally these two land masses were moving in the opposite direction, creating this inland sea, which resulted in sediments being washed into the base of it.
Yes.
But through what happened there? My computer's been playing really funny things.
Okay, we can go back to it later.
Sorry about
the important thing, and as you search for it, I can comment. The important thing about it is that Falkland area separated from the African area, probably in the early part of the flood. And so those sediments were laid down as rocks were washed in to the basin to the east of modern, to the west of modern South Africa. And then they were compressed as the flood year goes on into folded rocks, which are found predominantly along the coastal region. This might be a good time to break and take a question. I see in my private chat a question about dinosaur eggs.
Yes. Yeah, we got a bunch of questions in there. Professor McQueen, is that the one you wanted to start with?
I'll take that one, and then George can take the one about the White Cliffs of Dover, which seem to pop up every month, but it's an important issue.
Yeah. If you want, I can read this out.
Yeah, please read it while I get a sip of coffee here.
So the question for Professor McQueen is, critics point to nests of dinosaur eggs that are found in several places around the world. And they assert it is impossible that dinosaurs could have had enough time to create these nests and lay their eggs while they were fleeing from rising waters during the global flood to reach higher ground. Is this really a problem for our model, Professor McQueen?
No, not at all. Let me point out the weakness of the argument. If I move my head to this side, I hope you can see behind me the geologic column. Now this starts with the recent and goes back through the time of dinosaurs. I hope you can see a long-necked dinosaur right on my shoulder, right on this side here. And these zones have been interpreted by Dr. Gary Parker and many others as being ecological zones. So the dinosaur eggs that are preserved in the rock record were buried in the early part of the flood. And some people, when I say that, will say, oh, come on, McQueen. What in the world are you talking about? The dinosaur fossils are way above the base of the Grand Canyon. Well, that's in the evolutionary construction. If you find dinosaur eggs, then that becomes automatically Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, to Johnny Clock the Queen, as I've taught you. So if you find a dinosaur egg, that becomes Triassic. But from a creationist standpoint, from a flood geology standpoint, That group of dinosaur eggs, and again, let me use my grandchild's toys here. Imagine these to be a group of basalts that are found in India called the Deccan Plateau basalts. And on top of that, there are Mesozoic rocks. And so the evolutionary community considers there's a broad gap in between these basalts and the dinosaurs. They would call that an unconformity. From a flood geologist standpoint, these dinosaurs were living on that plateau, and they were rapidly buried during the first 6 months of the flood. It is only an evolutionary assumption about the age of the dinosaurs that makes it seem contradictory. Okay, George, you can go on to the White Cliffs of Dover.
Okay, let me read that question out, brothers. Great answer, Professor McQueen, to a common objection, a common talking point that I should say is repeated, even though it's been dealt with. So next question is, the White Cliffs of Dover on the eastern coast of England consist of chalk layers up to more than 350 feet thick. Is this a problem for the global flood model?
I'll let Brother George start, and then I have a comment at the end.
No, it's actually more of a problem for the old Earth scenario. Look, there are two forms of limestone. Most people think that it's only the fossiliferous type limestone, but we know that limestone can also be made chemically, and it's been shown through pumping of CO2 gas into deep down into the earth where temperatures are hot, that it creates limestone. They've also observed limestone being created during volcanic eruptions. Now, the reason why I say it's more of a problem for old Earth geologists is because, well, you look at the erosion, for example, of the White Cliffs of Dover. They're eroding at remarkable rates. If the Earth is billions of years old, there shouldn't be any England, to be honest. The other thing is with these limestones, they extend from England through Europe, the Middle East, over to America, and through to Australia. Now, if you're looking for mega sequences to show proof of a global flood, well, there's one there, a mega sequence. Now, according to evolutionists, these limestones deposit at a rate of about 1 to 3 centimeters per 1,000 years. Yet we find numerous fossils like nautiloids in the standing position, large fish, brachiopods, etc., that have been fossilized in a manner that would suggest there is no way that those creatures could have stood there patiently while those creatures were fossilized at that kind of rate.
Yeah,
that's why I say. Point. Yeah, that's why I say it's more of a shooting yourself in the foot sort of question.
Yeah,
I think that just to cover it a bit further, there are also studies that have been done on the deposition rates of limestone, and under certain catastrophic conditions, they do find that the production of these organisms are, I think, from memory, a billionfold to what they form under natural conditions. So, I mean, the global flood was a catastrophic event. So where there was lots of heat involved. So, no, it's not a problem for us. Actually, it's more of a problem for the old Earth scenario.
Let me add my 2 cents worth. If you look at a lot of World War II movies and you see ships off the area of Dover, the White Cliffs of Dover, They are white because they've got microfossils in them. And those microfossils form a chalk. And I want to get a big piece of this so I can illustrate it next month to the students here in our class. But the point that George made, let me carry over. Those same Devonian chalks also appear, let me move my hand here, in the state of Texas, just a 5-hour drive west of where I live here in Louisiana. And here they're called the Austin chalk. And as George correctly pointed out, as you move to Europe, there are chalks there. And so this is a mega sequence, a thick bed of rock. Now, remember the limestone divides into two parts. This kind of limestone here that's filled with microfossils is a fossiliferous limestone, but this is super. It's, there's almost no ordinary layers and so forth. It's just a massive group of microfossils. Now, in the flood model, we want to look, as we suggested earlier, we want to look at the picture on the front of the jigsaw puzzle. The White Cliffs of Dover are just one of the 500 pieces that we got to put together. The viewpoint of creation and the flood provides us a context for the rapid killing of millions and billions of these microfossils, because the wee beasties just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when the pH and EH and temperature of Noah's ocean changed, and all billion of them were killed in Dover, in England, in Europe, in the Austin Chalk. All over the world, they were killed because of this change in ocean chemistry. So that's how I would add to what George said.
I also want to say, David, the homogeneous nature of the limestone, there's no way that 350 feet of limestone could be that homogeneous over such a long period of deposition. You would definitely see other materials contaminating that deposit of limestone if it was that long age that they actually propose.
Professor McQueen.
Okay, let me take Shelley's question, if you'll read it for the group Standing for Truth.
Definitely. So thank you so much for your question, Shelley. The question is, are thunder eggs actually fossil eggs, or are they just rocks?
Well, here we get into the marketing of geologic materials. I can take you, Shelley, to places in the western part of the United States that a circular type of rock called a septarian nodule is sold as a thunder egg. I can go to other parts of the western U.S. where there is a rock that is agate, that if you cut it open, it's quite beautiful with layers and bands, and it's called a thunder egg. Who knows whether fossil eggs are actually marketed this way? I bought a lot of rocks in my 50 years as a professional geologist, and I don't think there's a standardization on that term.
I appreciate that, Professor McQueen.
Now, can I give some homework for next hour and also next month, Standing for Truth?
Absolutely.
I went back in preparation for today to the ore petrology book that I used when I was an undergraduate at the University of Tennessee. It's written by a professor who's passed away several years ago, Stanton. He was a professor in Australia, quite famous for his study of ores. Remember that the word petrology is the study of the rocks associated with an ore. Andrew Snelling and I have been working for several years, and we think that in addition to igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rocks, there actually should be a fourth type of rock, one that contains copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver, uranium, diamonds, that's valuable, and that would be called ore petrology. Well, you can probably buy this 1972 book for $1 on Amazon, and I would encourage you to do that and look at these pages, screenshot it, 52 to 53, and page 71. Because as we see next hour, Stanton comments about the mineralogy of diamonds and how there's plenty of room for carbon-14 to be in the crystal structure. Now, back in the 60s when he was studying this, nobody ever even looked for carbon-14, and so they would have considered it an oddball. He doesn't even mention it in his book, but the modern research of rate that we've talked about before and that we'll return to will show us that this issue of carbon-14 in diamonds is a huge issue. Now, let me give you a foretaste. We're coming up on 5 minutes here, being an hour. And so let me give you a foretaste of what we're going to talk about next time. If you remember this term for the upper Precambrian, you'll notice it runs from 1 billion years to just short of 500 million years. So that gives us a framework for the diamonds in the Kimberlites that we're going to talk about in South Africa. So you got a bracket there between 1 billion, 1,000 million years and 500 million years. Now tell me, how in the world can you find carbon-14 in the crystal structure of these diamonds when carbon-14 is completely gone away? Is it 50,000 years, George? Am I remembering that correctly?
Well, they say there shouldn't be any carbon-14 left after 100,000, but we do find detectable C14 in samples that are dated less than that. Now, before we actually delve deep into the carbon-14 in the diamonds issue, David, I'd like to share the screen and show you some of the geology in South Africa.
Yes.
That shows that there's evidence for a global flood. So, I'll share the screen again and show you some nice pictures that we can talk about.
Good. And while George does that, my coffee has grown cold, so I'll take my 1 hour break now and let George talk you through this, and I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay? Standing for truth.
Sounds good, Professor McQueen. Sounds good. I appreciate it.
Go ahead and drop my.
And George, you take your time, brother, because my coffee's sitting upstairs cold too. So I'll be listening, but you know me, I need my coffee. So I'm going to go grab that, and the floor is yours, brother. Take your time, man.
No worries. Thank you. So some of these pictures are going to show from the Cape Fold Mountains in South Africa, and you can see some remarkable folds there that illustrate the point of global flood. Now, you've got to remember, under secular explanations, these folds can only occur if the material is ductile and it attains ductility through heat. And in the case of shales, they estimate that that material should be under about 4.5 to about 7 kilometers depth, which means if these folds are on the surface of the earth, it suggests that 4.5 to 7 kilometers of erosion has occurred to reveal them. And of course, even under their own erosion rates, that's impossible. But I'm going to show you a couple more photos where these folds are actually shown in better detail. And you'll see some of them are just these folds are amazing. They're almost at 90 degrees. So there's from a young Earth creationist point of view, the global flood, we can explain that very easily. Those layers were moist when the Earth was when the continents were compressed, and hence we find those folds occurring because they were moist and they could easily bend in that manner. You'll see there an entire mountain range of folding. You see the individual layers as well. Okay, the individual layers. Now, if these individual layers took, in some cases, hundreds of thousands to hundreds of millions of years to form, some of those bottom layers would be as excuse the pun, hard as rock, and folding like that would literally fracture them and break them. But you see that they're nicely folded without a lot of evidence of fracture. Here's another one. Notice the different colors, suggesting it's different sediment type. You couldn't expect that hundreds of millions of years would deposit one material, and then that material goes astray, and there's nothing left of it, and then it's replaced by a different material, and then the other material comes back, etc., etc. Now we've shown through flume experiments the stratigraphy that you see there of those particular layers is possible under moving water, and it's not a problem for us. Big problem for secular geology. There's an entire mountain again of folds, and this is why the Cape Fold Mountains are such a great example of flood geology. There's another one, Table Mountain. Notice that clean cut of the mountain that can only occur through water. I think you find the same example at the Grand Canyon. So there's lots of evidence for a flood in those Cape Fold Mountains. More folds. It's amazing how much folding actually occurred in those ranges. Another one. The evidence is undeniable. There's an example of more layering of different colored materials. And notice the clean edge between those two different materials. That can't occur under secular geology, where they proposed millions of years of erosion between the layers. And that I'll leave that for Professor McQueen to explain, but I believe that's either a lava dome or maybe a craton that's been pushed up through tectonic plate movements. And we've already covered that particular map there, and I'll show you. They've done this through the identification of similar fossils in different continents, and you can see those Brazil versus Africa, and I think they've done the same thing at the tip of South America, and elsewhere in the world. These are the trilobite fossils that have been found, and they can actually link them via the finds and find out just which continent was and how it was actually connected to the other continent. Some more information there. All right, I've covered that bit. So Kimberlites we mentioned, and what they were, and the South African diamond, the Star of South Africa. Oh, there it is, 83.5 carats. So I said 84, so it was fairly close. That's around 16.7 grams. That's a very large diamond, by the way. Usually, 1 gram is considered a pretty large diamond. So to find one 16.7 grams is humongous. Okay, I'll stop sharing, and hopefully the rest of the gang's back.
Yeah, I'm here.
And
put that last Star of Africa diamond up, and I can use that to talk about what you will find when you read these pages in Stanton's 1972 book. So go ahead and share the screen again and put that diamond back up. And we'll use that
Oh,
as a start, George. Please.
okay, there you go.
Okay, yeah, leave it there. Now, a natural diamond has faces, Faces. A cut diamond like these, those are called facets. They're man-made. But inside those facets are the actual cubic crystal structure of diamond. And what Stanton points out in his book is that because of the nature of the cubic crystals of diamond, diamond has plenty of room to have inclusions in it. Now, those of you that have studied diamonds, and I have a chart in my book that deals with the different aspects of a diamond, how much does it weigh, what its color is, and so forth. Inclusions lower the value of diamonds. So the reason that a diamond like this is so valuable is it has very few of these inclusions. Our argument, and a good crystallographic argument, is there's absolutely no problem for having atoms in that diamond crystal structure. You know, a diamond is carbon, pure carbon, but because it's cubic, there could be zinc in there and other things that give inclusions and color to a diamond. Okay, you can go back to my screen now and I'll make a further comment. So when we think about the one world continent in the time before the flood, I can use my noodle here as a pointer. If I can figure out which way to put it. Do you see this peninsula here, George, if I can move it correctly?
Oh,
See
yeah.
that
Yep.
peninsula there?
Yes.
That's the peninsula that's on your map earlier. And this is the connection between Antarctica and South Africa. Huge craton right in that area. And so now let's move on to a further discussion about the geology of South Africa. The excellent photographs that George just showed us illustrate two very important points. There are sedimentary rocks in South Africa, as evidenced by those layered units that you saw and the folding that you see. I don't have the Play-Doh out today, but the noodle will serve just as well. Because the noodle is soft like the rocks were before the flood, the noodle can be bent into an anticline or a synclinal smiley face because it is soft and malleable. It's a very pointed argument that George and I have made over the last 6 months that the rock mechanics of structural steel and rocks are such, if you have a rigid thing like this marker and you put pressure for a long time slowly over it, it's going to break. It's not going to bend. The second important point in the pictures that George showed is that Table Rock Mountain that's in South Africa, the other plateaus, and the rounded, probably granite intrusions, all these are what Steve Austin has called antique geomorphology. Now, what does he mean by the word antique? Well, many of the side canyons in the Grand Canyon are not eroding today, not at the level that would produce an amphitheater in the red wall limestone. What would be called the geomorphology or the topography of South Africa is the same thing. These enormous features were eroded by rapidly moving water off the continent of Africa and into the oceans to the east and to the west the Atlantic and the on the west and the Indian Ocean on the right. Can you see this concept I'm talking about, George, about antique geomorphology?
Yeah, that's a new term that I hadn't heard before. Yeah.
And so that is very valuable. Now, if we go back to some of the diagrams that I showed earlier, we can elaborate on a very important point. And let me use this particular diagram here to illustrate my point. This is a craton that is called the Kapval. And in Zimbabwe, it's given a slightly different name. And in Namibia, it's given a slightly different name, and so forth. Well, this craton is a group of rocks without fossils. As I prepared for our class today, I went back and looked at the geology of South Africa that George showed us the geologic map earlier. And I was impressed with how much time it would take me to explain to the Standing for Truth audience about the great dike that runs from South Africa all the way up into Zimbabwe, the amount of time it would take to explain about the copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver deposits all over this part of Africa. One thing that concerns me, remember that I'm trained at the University of Michigan as a mine geologist. Economic geology is something we talked about episodes before. We economic geologists are frightened about what's happening in South Africa. Why would I say that? In South Africa, in Zimbabwe, in the old days, let's go back to 1960, 1970, 1980. Countries friendly to the West mined the cobalt. You cannot make an airplane without cobalt. I once worked on a team that looked at cobalt resources in America, and they're vanishingly small. If we can't import from places like South Africa and Zimbabwe, we are really hurting. When I did my geologic field work in Zimbabwe in 2019, I was fortunate to be allowed to be a visiting professor in geology and geography at the University of Zimbabwe. And one of the frightening things that I learned is that the communist Chinese are systematically, mine by mine, country by country, buying up the mineral resources of sub-Saharan Africa. Why? The governments themselves, the governments of Zimbabwe, the government of Botswana, in the old days it was called Congo-Brazzaville, Congo-Kinshasa. These countries are financially destabilized. Their currency compared to the yen is dead. And so I want you to understand that the geology we talk about, the creation week geology, the flood year geology, has tremendous geopolitical implications. Did I explain that well, you think, George?
Yeah. I was just going through my diamonds notes, and I wanted to bring up a point someone actually made, I think a few weeks back, claimed to be a geophysicist, PhD, and a professor like yourself. Yes. But the carbon-14 issue, David, it's littered with rescue devices. It's a real problem for the old Earth explanation.
Yes.
One of the things that I've heard is that carbon dating can only be done on organic materials, but they consider diamonds to be inorganic. this is a moot point. The
Yes,
fact of the matter is they find carbon-14, whether it's organic or inorganic, it doesn't make one iota of difference.
Let me teach you some mineralogy here.
Yeah.
If you only have carbon in a diamond, that is called, the diamond is considered inorganic. But if you begin to look at coal and you begin to look at the chemistry of our own bodies, there's always carbon and oxygen and nitrogen involved in DNA and so forth. And so the whole field of organic chemistry is based around carbon. It's inaccurate for that critic earlier to say, oh, a diamond is on the chart in the mineralogy book as an inorganic mineral. Well, that's true on one level, but it's a very unique kind of inorganic. The carbon atoms form tetrahedrons in the diamond structure, and those tetrahedrons, remember, tetra means 4, and so there's a carbon atom and then 4 carbon atoms around it, forming a cubic structure. And that structure is so large that elements like zinc, elements like chromium, elements like zirconium can get in that crystal structure. Well, we're arguing that carbon-12, carbon-14, if you think of it as an element, it too can get in that structure. And so the very important point, and let me go back to my noodle here, the very important point is that during the pre-flood time, when you got Precambrian rocks, rocks without fossils, Creation Week rocks, when those Kimberlite dikes erupted up very quickly, they had to be, according to the secular chronology, between 1 billion years old and 500 million years old. This is a deal breaker. It's a model breaker. You know, if we talk about what data fits the model of creation, what data fits the model of old Earth chronology, the reason that people go nuts when Standing for Truth talks about carbon-14 and diamonds is that it drops a model in billions and millions of years down to what George and I were talking about earlier, of anywhere from 500,000 years to 100,000. Did I say that right, George? That the half-life of carbon-14 is somewhere between 500,000 and
No.
50.
Carbon-14's half-life is 5,730 years.
5,000. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So you see, if you can find anything at all that's been decaying over a 5,000-year period in rocks that are supposed to be 1 billion or 500 million years old, I think even a fifth grader, a 10-year-old who's had basic earth science in school will see the contradiction in that. This is why the people that George has talked to in the past and I've talked to in the past on Standing for Truth, they invent elaborate rescue devices for this idea. You want to react to that, George?
Yeah, I just want to share my screen just to give the audience a bit more information on the carbon-14 organic and inorganic.
I'm impressed. You're addicted to that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you did it to me. You did it to me.
I'm a bad influence, brother. Go ahead.
Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this comes from the Geological Institute of America, the acronym GIA. This is what they say, right? I'm quoting. There are really only 2 sources for the carbon in natural diamonds. It can either come from carbon that has never left the Earth's mantle, which scientists call primordial, or it can be recycled carbon that has been released from the mantle and incorporated into the organic matter like bacteria or algae, or subsequently formed carbon-bearing materials like graphite or carbon-rich rocks like limestone or marble. These materials have then been carried back into the Earth's mantle by subduction, releasing the carbon for diamond formation. This is the secular explanation, okay? This is what Dr. Wang says. If you see very negative carbon isotope composition, say minus 24 C13, in most cases, this carbon is of organic origin. So they might be they might be coming from the surface of the Earth. Now they've done tests on fossilized wood samples, and you can see in these samples here those C13 PD. I forget what the B stands for, but you can see that they're around about the negative 24 mark, which suggests they're organic. Okay, that obviously it's wood, so it's organic. So they find the same carbon 13 measurement in diamonds. So the diamond is organic, and I call that a shooting yourself in the foot, because this particular person that we had commenting a few weeks ago,
yes,
cited this particular paper, Taylor and Southern, use of natural diamonds to monitor carbon-14 AMS instrument backgrounds. Now, the reason why I say it's a shooting yourself in the foot question is because when you look at their results, they found carbon-14 in those diamonds, which suggested they were 60 to 80,000 years old. But surprise, surprise, guess what? They put it down to contamination. I'd like to know, why is it whenever young Earth creationists do these tests and we find young ages, they always say contamination, but if they do carbon-14 and they get the answer they want, it's never contamination. But in the case of the diamonds that they actually tested themselves and found measurable quantities of carbon-14, they put it down to contamination in the AMS.
Okay, let me make a comment there, George, if I may.
Yeah.
The reason that this is so important to the evolutionary community is even the most faithful, even the most committed evolutionist cannot imagine the evolution of life in 6,000 years. They must have billions of years to be able to mix into this pudding, mix into the primordial soup, to get that first amoeba, to get that first organism. And so if they were to admit that there's objective scientific evidence that the Earth is only 5,000 years old, according to carbon-14 in diamonds, then they would have to go one additional step and say, well, the decay of the Earth's magnetic field leads us to a value of around 10,000 years. But wait, we're coming up with thousands instead of billions. And that breaks our model. You know, Standing for Truth, you've always encouraged me to go back to the Bible and to see how things fit into God's Word. And so let's see where this South Africa fits into the argument. Now, this is the third day. Listen to this. And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas, plural. And God saw that it was good. And then it goes on to talk about, and let the earth bring forth grass. Well, let's look at the Hebrew of this and think through it. Okay, if our model's correct, and there's one world continent shaped like a sea for creation, if viewed from outer space, then the way the scriptures would describe it, and let me get my diagram that I've drawn out here to show you. what I'm talking about, you see, he would use the word land because there was one world continent. He would use the word seas because depending on where you are in relation to Eden, if this is a model of where Eden is, Adam and Eve could walk down and see what in the old days was called the Tethys Sea in this area here. And there would be an ocean near South Africa and Antarctica, and then a northeast, south, and west ocean. So you can see where the scriptures would use the word seas, plural, but land, singular. And so by looking at the secular literature and how they put together a continent they want to call Rhodina or Gondwana land, all the different words that have been used over the last 50 years, this is in agreement with the biblical model. If you want to use the word flood geology, then all this is happening before the beginning of the flood. But I hope you can see, those of you that are students wanting to learn in our Standing for Truth audience, that the creation week, young earth, flood geology model fits the data better than the evolutionary model. I know, Standing for Truth, you have a viewpoint on that issue also.
Yeah, David. Sorry, Stanley. David, I've got more examples of carbon-14. It's not just in diamonds, but there are.
Yeah, please share that with the group. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Stanley, sorry, I'm going to share the screen because I just want to make sure I get through all of these points that I've made because it's relevant. Okay, so what we've done, we actually accessed I think 10 coal samples. According to secular geologists, those layers where they source these samples were ranging between 40 million to 250 million years, and you can see the 10 samples there. And those particular samples are radiocarbon dated ages of 21,000 to about 45,000 years. So, and bear in mind here, Dr. Paul Gem published an article in which he tabulated about 70 AMS measurements. In actual fact, there were 89 measurements of various samples that showed intrinsic measurable quantities of carbon-14, and these are in here. You can screenshot these later if you like, but you can see they found it in marble, shell, foraminifera, graphite, calcite, wood, anthracite, right through to they're the 89, full 89 of them. You can see all measured intrinsic carbon-14. And hello, they just tell you that it's contamination. But if it is contamination, and you got to understand that they actually use carbon-14 dating on some of these archaeological artifacts, they accept those dates because it agrees with their narrative. But if it's anything over 10,000 years, they consider that a fossil, and it should be in the millions of years. So they have to say it's contaminated. Now, just to give you an indication, the actual I'll just go back. I'll stop sharing. There are two objections to the carbon-14 issue. They say that contamination can occur in situ, but as we said, diamond is considered the hardest substance on Earth, and like Professor McQueen noted, the carbon lattice structure is so tightly packed, leaching from surrounding material cannot penetrate its interior. We do, however, and we've mentioned this earlier, that we do find free nitrogen inside the diamonds, and there may be a mechanism from nearby radiation from uranium to convert this nitrogen to C14. But tests have been done and calculations have been done to show that this radiation acting on the free nitrogen in the diamond can only account for a maximum of 1 in 10,000th of a parts per modern carbon. That's 0.0001. The AMS can only measure to 0.001 to the third decimal point. So this rescue device of the uranium, or the radiation coming from the uranium, is just that. It's a rescue device. It doesn't hold water. The other one is they talk about leaching, in particular with the coal samples, leaching from the coal into surrounding materials. And one particular person said to me, you know, if it's leaching carbon-14, why isn't it leaching carbon-12? I said, who said I didn't? Did I say that carbon-12 wasn't leaching? But they forget the fact that for every one carbon-14 atom, there are 1 trillion carbon-12 atoms. So if you leach out 1 carbon-14 and 1 carbon-12, that makes no difference to the result. It's ridiculous arguments. And of course, the favorite one, as I said, is the laboratory background contamination. Now, these labs are run by scientists, professional scientists. They do regular testing to determine that background contamination value, and they subtract it from their measurements. Now, in this Southern and Taylor paper, this particular person that mentioned it brought it to my attention. I actually researched that, and I actually spoke to Dr. Baumgartner. This is what that particular person said. Then I'll read to you what Dr. Baumgartner said about his comment. He says delta C14 is constant. These are the diamonds that they sample from Brazil, by the way, and they were actually done by get a lot of this. They were done by the University of California and the Keck Accelerator Mass Spectrometer Laboratory in the University of California. So these are their results, but this is what he says. He says they find that the delta C14 is constant across individual diamond faces that were measured by Taylor Southern, but delta C13 is highly variable due to mass-dependent fractionation. There ought to be a correlation if the C14 signal was intrinsic to the diamond and not sourced from machine background or some other source. But there is no such correlation because the C14 is not intrinsic to the diamond. This is the conclusion he made, right? But I contacted Dr. Baumgartner, and he was kind enough to reply, even though he was on his hospital bed. He says, yes, I have some comments to make. He says, first, the cross-section of the nitrogen-14 to the carbon-14 reaction is much higher than the carbon-13 to carbon-14. He says much more than a factor of 10. I think it's a lot more than 10. Also, nitrogen tends to present in most diamonds at moderate levels, high enough that most of the C14 is likely from the thermal neutron reactions with the nitrogen atoms. To me, it is very bizarre that there would be a large carbon-13 variation in a single diamond, but zonation, as the diamond formed, I guess that is possible. However, he says, if the nitrogen contamination were relatively uniform, that would lead to relatively uniform distribution of the resulting carbon-14. And that's what they found. Because one of the diamonds, they actually cut up into 6 different diamonds, and they looked at the carbon-14, and they found similar carbon-14 readings in those diamonds that they cut from the single diamond. And from there they make the assumption that because all these samples have got the same reading or relatively the same reading carbon-14, it must be background radiation or background contamination that's doing it.
Now, let me interject at this point a quote from Stanton's Ore Petrology to give you a mineralogical view of this. Now, this is written at a graduate level, so let me read the sentence and then explain the words. This is on page 52. Interstitial impurity diffusion in monoatomic crystals. So this is a crystal like graphite or diamond that's got monoatomic, in other words, it's got carbon in it. It has already been pointed out that interstitial impurities, so two mineralogists, carbon-14 inside the diamond lattice is interstitial, it's inside there, are the most common in hosts having open structures. In dealing with their diffusion, we are therefore chiefly concerned with crystals of wide spacing. Now listen to what he says here. A characteristically open structure of wide occurrence in the mineral kingdom is that of diamond, but it's not alone. Silicon has this, sphalerite, zinc sulfide, copper iron sulfide has it, many others. The arrangement is such that each atom is at the center of a tetrahedron, the bonds being directed to the tetrahedral corners. And inside this wide spacing is where the carbon-14 comes in and fits in. And so the reason when they cut that diamond up into the pieces that all the carbon-14 dated the same, George, is because it was all trapped. It was all trapped at the same time. And so if you understand the crystallography and mineralogy of diamond, their situation gets worse and worse and worse. And the young Earth viewpoint rises like cream on top of the milk.
Yeah, if I can finish off what Dr. Baumgartner said to me regarding that particular report. He says, however, the solid case that Southern and Taylor make that their machine background is so extremely low to me almost eliminates the possibility that it could somehow account for the C14 in the diamonds. He goes on to say the carbon-13 variation within a single diamond is unusual in itself, which prompts me to wonder whether that variation might merely be reflecting the carbon-13 measurement statistics. Now, I won't read the rest of the email that he sent me, but it's more of a personal nature. I think I'll leave it at that. But look, these eight diamonds that this University of California tested actually had ages, radiocarbon ages of 65,000 to 80,000 years. As I said, the ninth diamond was cut into 6 equal fragments, which were analysed individually. They yielded essentially identical radiocarbon ages ranging from 69,400 to 70,600. Then they say this suggests the carbon-14 was evenly distributed through this diamond, which is consistent with it being intrinsic carbon-14 and not contamination. So why would carbon-14 be evenly distributed somehow mean that it's contamination coming from the AMS? It's not. It just means that the nitrogen-14 in that particular diamond was evenly distributed when it was converted to carbon-14. So nothing more than rescue devices. I went on to, because when I was researching it, I went into these blog spots because that's where you'll see most of these refutation in blog spots.
Yes.
And most of these so-called experts in the blog spots, they'll review what the creationists have said about the radiocarbon ages, and pretty much on every one of those comments, the very last thing they'll say is creationists are liars. That's not an argument. I mean, that's not an argument.
That's an ad hominem. That's an attack.
That's an ad hominem, yeah. I mean, as I pointed out, there were samples in the coal beds that were dated 48 to 50,000 years.
Yeah.
All
Very good
sorts. And the other one too, David, why are they so scared? There was a paper, I think they call themselves the Paleo Group. They're secular scientists. I think there were 5 or 6 scientists put up a paper at the conference in Singapore, an international conference. That paper was removed from the conference about an hour before it commenced. Why are they so scared of these results? Like they're scientists. They should be interested.
Again, the Standing for Truth audience needs to understand the incredible significance of this. If it's really true that diamonds in the Kimberlites in South Africa that have to date between 1 billion years and 500 million years, if they're returning dates that are a couple of half-lives, carbon-14 half-life is rounded up to about 6,000 years, this is a deal breaker. Now, those of you that are serious need to go on Amazon and buy this book. Oh, you might say, well, that's 50 years old, McQueen. Well, it is. But Stanton's Orbitrology is a standard text, and it presents a crystallographic support to what George has said about cutting these diamonds into pieces. And so serious students need to dive into this pretty deeply. Why do you not hear much about the geology of South Africa, Zimbabwe, sub-Saharan Africa? Because in my study, and I've been looking at this in some detail since 2019, the geology is incredibly complicated. I barely know how to put together the different kinds of igneous and metamorphic rocks that are associated with these pre-flood rocks in South Africa. So it's a topic that we can return to. May I take one of the questions standing for truth, and then I'd like to turn the rest of the time over to you and George because we're coming up on our 2-hour mark here.
Absolutely, Professor McQueen. We've got a couple more questions here that have not yet been answered. Maybe I'll ask this one because this question has been put forth by the critics. I've seen it many times.
Okay.
Where they ask, how did these rock layers harden so quickly after being laid down during the global flood?
Okay, we'll go back to the noodle argument and the Plato argument. At the end of the flood, as the waters were receding over the earth, the rock layers were very flexible. It's saying in the question, the limestone layers should show evidence of fossils being jumbled together by rushing water. Not so. This layer was buried, and again, we can use the limestones of the lower part of the Grand Canyon. We can use the limestones of the Appalachian Mountains in Tennessee. These rocks were laid down this way, and they were laid down quickly. The word for this zone between the orange and the green is called a contact. These contacts are what are called knife edge. No evidence of erosion in between them. And so when these things get bent, like we've seen in South Africa, they're being bent in the immediate post-flood time, in a time that's called post-flood residual catastrophe. So when you look at the bending of these limestone layers and the faulting of it, you can see how they can be from the standpoint of engineering that George and I have talked about, and rock mechanics. You've got an anticline and a syncline.
Yeah.
We've got a question here, gentlemen, from Shelley. Thank you so much for your question, Shelley. Question for McQueen or Bond. Is there a difference between Canadian diamonds and African diamonds? Now, somebody did answer in the chat, though. Dell said Canadian diamonds tend to say a lot.
Well, here's my answer to that, and it's a matter of money. The rate project around the year 2000, the rate project was very well funded. Hundreds of thousands of dollars was put in that project. Now the rate project has gone away. It's an issue of funding. Before we can test Canadian diamonds and diamonds from Arkansas, a 4-hour drive north of where I live, George, is Crater of Diamonds State Park, developed on a type of kimberlite called a lamphophyrdite. And it's the only place that you can go in the whole world and collect diamonds. And every week there's a diamond of around 0.5 carats found there. Ms. McQueen has been there. Ms. McQueen and I have been there 2 times. It's so frustrating to her because she looked so carefully and didn't find it. She's always better at finding fossils and stuff than I am. But if we had another $100,000 contributed to the cause, we could analyze these diamonds from Canada, Arkansas, South Africa, and all the other places that you showed kimberlites there. We could analyze these, but it's a matter of funding.
Yes, it's expensive to buy diamonds, isn't it? Standing, can I just share one more thing, because we find this is
yes, brother, but since we're at 1 hour and 36 minutes, there is another question here that I would love to get to before Professor McQueen would have to go.
okay.
Okay, so the question here, Professor McQueen, is the critics have stated that if all limestone were deposited by Noah's flood during a giant tsunami, then all limestone layers should show evidence of fossils being jumbled by rushing water. The critics say this is not the case. Is this a plausible or a valid argument in your opinion, Professor McQueen?
Okay, here we need to go to the idea of multiple working hypotheses. There are creation scientists that have their focus on impacts hitting the ocean waters during the flood and creating these tsunamis. Other creation scientists, flood geologists, say that disruptions in the mantle created the fountains of the Great Deep, and as the water came up, it created a tsunami. In my own personal model, I tend to de-emphasize that and look more to what George and I have talked about as the chemistry of Noah's Ocean. Now, it's true that the White Cliffs of Dover and other rocks that I can show you in the future are what are called fossiliferous limestones, no question about it. But a lot of limestones that are called micrites or limestone muds are directly precipitated from the flood waters. And so there's no requirement that the fossils be jumbled. The only requirement is that they be buried. And the argument that we've used several times in the past of a clam that's got 2 sides to the shell. If you go to the beach in Florida or in Eastern Australia and you look for modern clams, plesiopods that have been washed up, they're all popped open. Very, very rarely will you find that muscle still around, even after a few days of being washed up on the beach. So our argument is the fact that many of these clams that are found in the Appalachian Mountains, in England, in the fossil-bearing beds in South Africa, they are closed like this because they've been catastrophically buried.
The other explanation on the reverse side, David, is according to secular geology, if the limestone is deposited 1 to 3 centimeters per 1,000 years, we've observed entire whale carcasses literally been eaten away, including the bone, within a year. So how are you going to fossilize something when a dead carcass is really eaten up by bacteria and worms, etc., in a single year. There's
Okay,
no
very
way.
good point.
Yeah.
And let me make a final 5-minute presentation and turn the rest of the time over to you guys, okay? I'm beginning to run out of my voice here. Let me summarize it this way. When you look at rocks without fossils, the Precambrian rocks of South Africa that I emphasize, those folded sedimentary rocks that George emphasized, whether you look at the Precambrian ones or the flood year ones, I hope you can see that the model that we're putting together is an adequate explanation for how you have rocks without fossils. You have one world continent created during the creation week before there was sin in the world. And so there are no fossils. There's no evidence of sin and death. You've got to go up to the time of the great flood, the time of Noah, to get that. Keep in mind that Methuselah was 969 years old. So at the very least, you've got about 1,000 years between creation, and probably more if you do the math correctly in Genesis 1, 5, 10, and 11. But let me go back to what I started with. What's the most important thing about putting the jigsaw puzzle of science together is you've got to see the picture on the front of the box, because the 500 pieces don't make any sense alone. You've got to have what the old Germans called the Weltbild, the structure of the world, which were provided in the book of Genesis. And so as we go week after week, Standing for Truth is committed to supporting what the Bible teaches. Gentlemen, with that, I'll say goodnight and ask you to drop the video, and I'll look forward to our discussion next week.
Well, thank you so much, Professor McQueen. We really did miss you. I want to let everybody know in the chat. We've had a very lively chat tonight, Professor McQueen. It's been a great show. People definitely missed you. I want to let them know, especially because we've got some new viewers and subscribers. Check the description box for the playlist with all of Professor McQueen's videos he has done with us. I think we're up to between 20 and 25, maybe more. But you'll find answers to all your most common questions from the critics. We also have a debate that Professor McQueen did a couple months back with Jordan on accelerated nuclear decay. So please check that out. Professor McQueen, thanks again for joining us. The 2 hours has flown by. Another fantastic show.
It's amazing to me, Standing for Truth, that you've contacted 3 professional geologists, critics, and none of them will agree to debate me. Maybe somebody will in the future.
Yes. If anybody knows anybody who's willing to debate Professor McQueen, who has some qualifications and knows the topic as well as Professor McQueen does, please shoot me an email. So again, Professor McQueen, I thank you so much for being here and giving us your time. You're an amazing blessing to this ministry. And before you leave, David, George, was there any final words you wanted to make before I drop David's feed here?
Yeah. Just to add to David's answer to that last question, in the Grand Canyon, they've estimated there are around over 1 billion nautiloids and other fossils. Some are in the standing position, others are flat. But one of the striking indicators of a water deposition is the direction. Most of these fossils are actually aligned in the one direction, which means there was a water flow in that direction.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
That's an important point to make, because if these things occurred over millions of years and there's been water coming from every direction to lay them,
of course.
you shouldn't see that particular geometry in those fossils.
That is true. And I'll leave the rest of the show to you guys, and I will see you next week.
Okay,
see you, David.
God bless, David.
I've got one last point to make, Standing. I need to share the screen because this is an objection that I've heard a few times, and I just want to explain it to the audience and how we actually solve that particular problem that these evolutionists pose to us. So I'm just going to, yep.
Well, I was just going to elaborate for 10 seconds on what Professor McQueen was saying. So our goal would be for Professor McQueen's next debate. Our goal would be to have it against somebody who's also qualified in the field and can essentially match up in terms of a discussion with Professor McQueen, because of course we have numerous evolutionists who'd be willing to debate, but I think a lot of the debate would just consist of them saying, I'm not a geologist. And there's not that much fun in that. So we are seeking, hopefully, a geologist or somebody who's knowledgeable on that topic to debate Professor McQueen. And so far, I've had a few decline. And what's funny is the few that have declined actually run websites and blogs where they spend a great deal of time supposedly debunking the arguments from people like Professor David McQueen. So it's funny that on their blog, they're more than okay with attacking the global flood model. But when offered the opportunity to defend those claims in a live discussion with a professional geologist like Professor McQueen, they turn it down. So we find that funny. Plus, we have Mike Orr on frequently as well, who is aware of a lot of these websites, and he has assured us that the arguments coming from these critics are not impressive. Anybody in the chat who has not yet seen, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, I had Mike Ord on for almost a 3-hour broadcast titled Evolutionary Challenges Debunked or Answered. And I highly recommend that presentation because it was over an hour, his presentation, that is. We did an audience Q&A afterwards. It was over an hour where he addressed thoroughly I guess the so-called best objections to the global flood. So I definitely highly recommend watching that. We should be having Mike Ord on again next month. So be sure to bring your questions. So that being said, George, brother, I want to hand it over to you. I see your screen is shared and you're good to go.
Okay, one of the points I want to make is that particular article there, Japan's geologic history is in question after discovery of metamorphic rock microdiamonds. Now, I'm not sure if you've been listening, but the secular explanation is that diamonds occur deep down at 150 to 200 kilometers within the Earth's mantle. Okay, so the problem here is they found micro diamonds in metamorphic rock. Metamorphic rock doesn't form at those depths. I'm sorry. So that's why they're looking to rewrite Japan's geological history. But one of the things I wanted to bring up, one of the things the evolutionists will bring up and say, okay, if you've done all these C14 dates in these particular sample, why aren't those C14 dates the same? There's a variation in C14 dates. Well, we can explain it via a number of ways. First of all, you've got to understand carbon dating does not measure the age. It measures the ratio of C14 to C12. And that C14 to C12 ratio is based around a constant value that they've adopted pre-1940s. Now, the reason why it's pre-1940s is because they found, because of nuclear testing, the nuclear tests actually generated high levels of C14. So that's why they went to pre-1914. But these are some of the other reasons, though. You can see that some of the C14 gets lost during fossilization and from exposure to water. Like I said, it's permeable. It can move around. The other example is the stronger magnetic field inhibited the C14 production. Another example is if the atmosphere were millions of years old, then the C14-C12 ratio would be at equilibrium. the variation in C14 dates proves the ratio is not a constant, and hence the atmosphere is not millions of years old. Now, since C14 is forming faster than it is decaying, it is impossible to know the past ratio and get an accurate age calculation by carbon-14 dating. The other example is the alteration effects such as fractionation of the carbon-13 correction. Also, you'll find volcanic eruptions and forest fires contaminate the atmosphere. Therefore, the C14-C12 ratio can be wildly different. We know carbon-14 is generated through cosmic rays from the sun by reacting with the nitrogen-14 in the atmosphere. Now, we know that sun flares occur. I think they're predicting a sun flare to occur in the next year or two. You'll find these sun flares will also generate more carbon-14. So there's a number of different explanations why those C14 ages can vary. And really, that's all I've got to say to finish that off. I mean, pretty much every objection they have has been answered, but do you think they would listen to it? Of course not.
Amen, brother. Amen. Well said. Very well said. Another fantastic presentation. Great work to you and Professor McQueen. A lot of compliments and kind things to say in the chat. And to any critics in the chat, we at Standing for Truth, we believe in critical thinking. And as you know, George, we host almost daily discussions, debates, lectures, presentations, interviews. Anybody new to the channel, check the playlist titled Interviews Hosted by Standing for Truth. There's about 65 plus interviews in there with numerous PhDs and experts in various fields. Also, check out the debates hosted and moderated by Standing for Truth playlist. We've got well over 100 now in there as well on all sorts of topics. So if there are any critics that are willing to discuss or debate these issues, like I said, we don't believe in being a keyboard warrior. So please feel free to either email myself or leave a comment in the description or in the comment section of these videos, and we are happy to set something up. So that being said, George, I'm going to give you some final words. Actually, let me go over a couple announcements or reminders again. This Thursday, we've got the big debate, Rhodes versus Hovind on the age of the Earth. The following week, another big Age of the Earth debate, Kent Hovind versus Smokey Saint. That's going to be a ton of fun as well. Make sure you are here for this Wednesday, Dr. Frank Turek. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. That's going to be a ton of fun. We've been getting a lot of theology debates in there too. We just hosted a Trinity versus Oneness debate last week. Please check that out. We also had a debate on the nature of hell. Please check that out. We've got a solid, an exciting end times debate in August, first week of August. Dr. Kent Hovind taking on Stacy Turbeville. That's going to be a lot of fun as well. So I'm also in the works currently, about to confirm some more debates that I should have up on the upcoming live stream section of the YouTube channel shortly. So please check that out to make sure that you are staying up to date on all the upcoming events. George can tell you we've also got an event-filled August because we're going to be having Dr. Charles Jackson back on. End of the month here, we're going to have John McKay, the creation guy, back on. Hopefully Mike Ord, Sal Jardina next month, and we're going to have Dr. Joseph Kazil back on as well in a couple of weeks for a highly technical lecture on junk DNA. You are not going to want to miss out on that one. That's going to be a ton of fun. So, George, go ahead, brother.
And the new guest, Dr. Ken Coulson, associate professor. I'd just like to finish off standing with something that our own Matt Mann has said in the chat. He says, "I'll just tell you now exactly what Jesus told those who saw no miracles, not signs of God." He says, "More blessed are those who believe without seeing."
Amen.
I think that's very appropriate.
Amen. Amen, brother. Well said. Well said. Check out Matt Man and myself. We did a video yesterday debunking Joel Duff. We went almost 4 hours, and that's why my voice is a little hoarse today. I think I completely lost it. Not to mention coffee probably doesn't help either. But any final thoughts, George? Any final words? As always, you did a great job, brother. And I know you've got a lot planned too in the future. A lot of critics we are going to be debunking some of these arguments that keep popping up. So, George, any final words, my good man?
Yeah, just remember what I keep saying. Evolution is nothing more than presuppositions supported by vivid imagination, biased and subjective interpretations, outlandish speculation and conjecture. That's pretty much what it is.
That's pretty much what it is, brother.
All the evidence they cite is really just interpretations to back up their own narrative.
Amen.
And thank you for having me. I kind of like the every 2 week sort of scenario because it gives me more time to prepare and do some research.
And you can really see, especially tonight, you can see just how much research and work you put into this. So to the audience, share this content around. We want it to get out to as many people as possible. It's important. It's 2021, and it's a great time to be a young earth creationist. The evidence really is on our side. Soggy Crawfish says, I hope Dr. Hoven's voice can hold up to this month's debate challenges on SFT. We've got him scheduled for 3 debates in 3 weeks. So Dr. Dino is going to be a busy man. Anyways, that being said, we will see you guys on Wednesday. George, again, great job. Professor McQueen, great job. God bless. Brothers, and SFT and George Bond are out.